My name is Olivia Iris. I'm 34. I was sitting on the edge of my childhood bed with my laptop open when my sister reached past me and lifted it straight out of my hands. It happened fast enough that I didn't react at first. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. She just turned and walked down the hallway toward the dining room, holding it open like she wanted an audience. Thanksgiving dinner was already on the table. Plates half-served, glasses mid-pour. I heard my mother's voice carry before I saw her face, sharp, curious, asking what Rachel was doing. Then the room went quiet in a way that wasn't confusion yet, more like calculation. Rachel set the laptop down in front of everyone and tilted the screen. She laughed once, too loudly, as if she expected something embarrassing to appear. What came up instead was a dashboard I hadn't closed. Account balances, pending contracts, figures that didn't need explaining if you knew how to read numbers. No one spoke for a few seconds. My father leaned forward. My mother stood up. Rachel's voice changed first. She said my name the way people do when they think they've caught you hiding something. She said I was rich. She said it like an accusation. I walked into the room and stopped behind my chair. I didn't reach for the laptop. I didn't try to shut it. There wasn't anything to clarify. The numbers were already doing that on their own. My mother asked me why I had that much money. Then she asked how long. Then she said it was unbelievable that I'd let them struggle while I sat on millions. She didn't wait for answers. She was already talking about tuition, the house, what could finally be paid off. She spoke as if decisions were being made. Rachel wanted to know the exact amount. She kept refreshing the page like it might change. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I slid my phone into my bag. As I zipped it, I heard my mother say we needed to sit down and talk this through properly. She said I hadn't just walked into a room where my life had been reassigned. I left before the food was cleared. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already vibrating. I didn't look at it. I drove home instead. I didn't realize then how quickly that night would follow me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 14 missed calls. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I put my phone face down on the counter and washed my hands like I'd just come in from the cold. The first message I opened came an hour later. It was from my mother. She said we'd gotten off on the wrong foot. She said families didn't keep secrets like that. She said we needed to meet soon and talk numbers calmly, like adults. Rachel texted after that, shorter messages, less polite. She wanted to know why I'd lied. She wanted to know how long I'd been playing poor. She asked if I thought it was funny to let her struggle while I sat on a fortune. She ended with a list of things she needed help with immediately. My father didn't text. He called again and again until my phone went to silence. When he finally left a message, he talked about responsibility, about how money changed people, about how disappointed he was that I'd let it come out that way. I didn't respond. The next morning, my phone was full again. Missed calls from numbers I didn't have saved. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a message asking if the rumors were true. Someone else said my mother was upset and I should smooth things over before it got worse. I went to work anyway. I answered emails. I reviewed reports. I signed off on a shipment that needed to be rerouted. Everything moved the way it always did, except my phone kept lighting up at the edge of my desk. Around noon, my mother sent a longer message. She'd already done the math. She said if I'd just been up front, things wouldn't feel so tense. She asked what portion I thought was fair to contribute going forward. She phrased it carefully, like it was a negotiation we were already in. I didn't correct her. Later that afternoon, Rachel posted something vague online about betrayal and greed. She didn't use my name, but she didn't need to. By the evening, distant relatives were forwarding it to me with comments like "This can't be about you and your mom's heartbroken." I put my phone back in my bag before leaving the office. As I locked the door behind me, I had the brief, clear sense that whatever this was turning into, it wasn't going to stay contained. I didn't try to stop it. The following week, I asked my assistant to change how my calls were routed, not dramatically, just enough that anything unfamiliar went to a separate line I could check later. I also told accounting to pause the recurring transfer that went out at the end of every month. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just asked them to hold it until I said otherwise. That Friday, my mother sent a message asking if something had gone wrong with the deposit. She phrased it like a technical issue, a bank error, something temporary. I didn't answer that one either. Instead, I opened a document on my computer that I hadn't touched in a long time. It was a simple list: assets, accounts, obligations. I updated the numbers, checked the dates, and saved it under a neutral name. When I finished, I forwarded it to my attorney with a short note asking for availability the following week. Over the weekend, the calls picked up again. My father left a message saying my silence was making things worse. Rachel sent a voice note crying, then another one angry, then one asking if we could talk privately without our parents involved. She said she didn't want this to turn into something ugly. On Sunday, knowing I wouldn't answer, my mother sent me a photo of the Thanksgiving table, cleared now, with the caption, "Families work things out." I looked at it once, then archived the thread. Monday morning, security forwarded me a heads-up that my family had been asking questions about visiting the office. Nothing direct yet, just inquiries. Names, schedules. I replied with a single line asking them to flag any further contact and loop me in immediately. At the time, it felt like preparation more than a decision. Just steps taken quietly in order. I still believed, briefly, that if everyone calmed down, this might level out on its own. It didn't. What made that week feel familiar wasn't the volume of messages. It was the shape of them. I'd seen it before, how quickly curiosity turned into expectation, how silence was treated as defiance instead of space. It wasn't new behavior. It was a pattern finally aimed at something they wanted. When my sister was born, everything in the house reorganized around her. Not dramatically, just quietly in ways that became permanent. Doors stayed closed. Schedules shifted. If she coughed, I was sent to stay elsewhere for a few days. At first, it was temporary. My room became storage. My things were boxed early, just in case. There was one afternoon in middle school when I stood on a small stage for a school showcase. I'd practiced for weeks. I remember scanning the audience and realizing no one from my family was there. Later that night, my mother told me they'd lost track of time because my sister had a recital. She said it like it couldn't be helped. That explanation got reused often. It covered a lot of absences. When I did well in school, it was acknowledged privately, if at all. When my sister did poorly, it was discussed openly, with concern and support. Report cards were compared only one way. My accomplishments were treated as expected. Hers were treated as fragile. By the time I was preparing to leave for college, decisions about my life were framed around how my absence might affect her. I remember standing in the kitchen with an acceptance letter folded in my hand while my mother asked who would take my room. Rachel answered before I could. On move-in day, my parents didn't come. They said it would be too disruptive. My aunt drove me instead. She slipped some cash into my hand and told me not to overthink it. That was how things worked. Attention flowed one direction. Resources followed it. When something of mine was taken or reassigned, it was never described as loss. It was described as practicality. So when my mother started planning out loud at Thanksgiving, when Rachel refreshed my account page like it belonged to her, it didn't feel shocking. It felt consistent. The only difference was scale. And this time, there was something they wanted that I wasn't willing to hand over quietly. By the time I left home for good, I'd learned not to announce plans until they were already done. It wasn't strategy so much as habit. Attention had a way of rerouting things. I studied materials analysis with a focus on historical objects, which sounded abstract enough that no one asked many questions. I worked between classes, cataloging, sorting, learning how to look closely without drawing attention to myself. In my second year, I took a part-time position assisting with estate valuations for a regional firm. It was unglamorous work. Long tables, gloves, quiet rooms. But it taught me how often valuable things were misread simply because no one slowed down. There was one piece early on, a bracelet logged as costume, that didn't sit right with me. The clasp was wrong for the period it claimed to be. The wear was too honest. I flagged it, expecting to be corrected. Instead, my supervisor took a second look. The piece sold later for more than my annual salary. After that, I was given more responsibility, not publicly, just steadily. I was asked to double-check, then to lead small assessments, then to handle clients who wanted discretion. I learned which questions to ask and which ones to let hang. I learned how much people would pay for certainty. I didn't tell my family much about any of it. When they asked, I said I worked with old items. My mother told people I was in a shop. That version traveled well enough. A few years in, I took a risk and started consulting independently. I rented a narrow office above a print shop and kept the lights low. I said no more often than yes. The work grew anyway. Word spread quietly, the way it does when people don't want publicity but do want results. There was a collection later, several pieces from a private European estate, that changed the scale of everything. The commission from that job paid off my loans and gave me room to hire help. Then another contract came in, then another. I expanded slowly, city by city, never faster than I could oversee. Throughout all of it, my life stayed small on the outside. I drove the same car. I lived in the same apartment longer than necessary. I wore pieces I authenticated without pointing them out. No one noticed. That was fine. Every month, a transfer went out to my parents' account, enough to cover what they said they needed. It arrived reliably, and no one asked where it came from. When Rachel's expenses grew, the requests became less specific and more assumed. I let it continue. Not because I felt obligated, because it was easier to control the flow than to explain why it existed at all. That worked right up until it didn't. As the company grew, the gap between what my life looked like and what it actually was widened without much effort on my part. I kept my routines simple. Early mornings, long days, quiet evenings. If anyone asked, I said I was busy. That explanation rarely required follow-up. My mother continued to introduce me the same way she always had. She'd say I worked with antiques, sometimes adding that it was nothing big. I didn't correct her. At family gatherings, conversations flowed around me rather than toward me. People asked Rachel about her plans, her needs, her stress. When the check came, I picked it up without comment and passed it back down the table. By then, the company had contracts in multiple regions. I traveled often, but not visibly. No branded bags, no announcements. When an industry magazine ran a profile on the firm, my name was in it, but not my photo. At Thanksgiving a few years earlier, my mother had complained that I was never around anymore. I told her work was busy. She said that made sense. Rachel's spending habits escalated in ways that were hard to miss if you were looking. New devices, new memberships, short-term plans that required long-term funding. When she mentioned costs, the expectation was already built in. My parents framed it as helping her stay afloat. I framed it as a monthly line item. Occasionally, I wore something that would have stood out to someone in my field, a ring with a provenance that would stop a room, a bracelet from a period most people only recognize by imitation. At home, no one commented. Once, Rachel asked if it was real. I said it was old. She lost interest. There was a certain calm in knowing exactly what I was hiding and why. The money itself wasn't the secret. The secret was that I didn't belong to the version of the family they'd built their expectations around. So when my mother spoke about me with a kind of polite dismissal, when Rachel complained about how hard things were for her, I stayed quiet. I let them believe what they needed to believe. It kept the peace. It kept the requests indirect. It kept me out of conversations I didn't want to have. Until the night it all came into the open, without my consent, in a room where restraint had never been valued. I'd offered to handle most of the meal that year because my mother said her back had been acting up. I ordered from a local place she liked and filled in the rest myself. She commented once on the quality of the food, asked where I'd gotten it, then moved on. No one asked how I paid for it. After dinner, I went back to my old room to check an auction listing before a deadline. I sat on the bed with my laptop balanced on my knees, door half closed. I was there maybe 3 minutes before Rachel pushed it open without knocking. She asked what I was doing. I said working. She stood there longer than necessary, eyes on the screen, waiting for something to register. When it did, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her face. She reached out, took the laptop, and said, "Let's show everyone this." She didn't run, she didn't hide it. She carried it out like proof. In the dining room, she set it down where everyone could see. She scrolled once then again, like she didn't trust what she was looking at. My father leaned forward. My mother stood up from her chair so fast it tipped back. Questions came out of order. How? Since when? What was that number? Rachel said it out loud first. She said I was loaded. She laughed again, sharper this time, like she'd won something. I stayed where I was, hands at my sides. I said I owned the firm. I said it had been that way for a while. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sit down. My mother's face changed. Disbelief gave way to anger without stopping in between. She said I'd let them worry for nothing. She said I'd watch them stress while I hid money. She said families didn't work like this. As she spoke, she started listing things, debts, plans, renovations, talking through them as if she were thinking out loud. Rachel asked exactly how much I had. She refreshed the page again. My father said I should have told them. He said secrecy looked like selfishness. He said it felt like a betrayal. I told them I'd been sending money every month. I said the amount. My mother waved it off. She said that wasn't the point. The point was trust. The point was transparency. The point was that this should have been shared. I picked up my bag from the chair where I'd left it. My mother told me to sit down. Rachel told me not to walk away like that. Someone said we needed to talk this through properly. As I reached the door, my mother was already saying, "Well, if she has that much, then the first thing we should do is..." I didn't hear the rest. I closed the door behind me and walked out into the cold. My phone started buzzing before I reached the car. I didn't turn around. The days after Thanksgiving blurred into a rhythm I hadn't invited but recognized immediately. Calls came first, then messages, then emails forwarded through relatives who said they were just checking in. The tone shifted depending on who was reaching out. My mother alternated between wounded and practical. My father leaned on obligation. Rachel moved back and forth between apology and accusation, sometimes in the same thread. I didn't engage. I let everything collect. A week later, they showed up at the office. I wasn't there when it happened. Security called to tell me my parents and sister were in the lobby asking to see me. They said it was urgent. They said it was family business. When security asked if they had an appointment, my mother said they didn't need one. I told them not to let anyone up. From what I was told later, Rachel tried to argue that she worked in a related field and wanted to talk shop. My father asked if this was really necessary. My mother said it was humiliating to be treated like strangers. They were asked to leave. The following morning, Rachel sent a message saying this didn't have to get ugly. She suggested setting up a trust, something formal, something that would protect everyone. My mother followed up with figures she'd clearly spent time on. They were labeled as suggestions. That afternoon, I met with my attorney. We talked through options slowly. Access, boundaries, documentation, what could be stopped cleanly and what would require notice. When I left, I had a short list of next steps and a longer sense of clarity. The monthly transfers never resumed. When my mother noticed, she called to ask if I'd made a mistake. When I didn't answer, she left a message saying she was worried. Later that day, she sent another saying she felt punished. Rachel posted again, this time less vague. She framed it as abandonment. She said money had changed me. She said she'd always looked up to me and didn't understand why I was shutting her out. I didn't respond to that either. Instead, my attorney sent a formal notice outlining where communication should go and what would no longer be entertained. It was brief, professional, final in tone without being hostile. After that, the calls slowed. My parents tried once more to come by the office. Security recognized them immediately and turned them away without calling me this time. A week later, Rachel attempted to schedule a meeting through the public intake form using a different last name. It was declined. Each step felt small on its own: a paused transfer, a locked door, a letter sent. Together, they closed something that had been open for most of my life. By the time the formal notice went out, I'd already checked in with my grandmother. She was the one person who had never questioned my judgment, who remembered both the small and large patterns from my childhood without needing explanation. I didn't ask for advice. I didn't need reassurance. I told her what had happened in plain terms, the sequence of calls, the office visits, the online posts. She listened. She didn't argue. She didn't try to soften the situation. She simply said, "You're handling it the way you need to." That was enough. Her support didn't change anything externally. The calls still came at first, the messages still appeared. But after speaking with her, I stopped looking at them as attempts to pressure me. I started seeing them as evidence that I'd done what I intended, that my boundaries were necessary. When I arrived at work the next day, I noticed the team moving with a quiet confidence. They knew my family's names and faces now, and they treated the security protocols as routine. It wasn't about loyalty to me personally. It was about respecting the structure I'd set. Later that week, I received a brief email from a client confirming a contract extension. The tone was businesslike. The content was simple, but the timing felt significant. Life moved forward, even when the people who had tried to impose themselves couldn't. I didn't explain any of this to anyone. I didn't post online or announce a resolution. I let it settle into place naturally, in small, measured steps. Calls were returned with one line, forwarded through the attorney when necessary, ignored when appropriate. The pace was deliberate. The effect was quiet but complete. I realized then that support doesn't need to be loud or constant. It just needs to be present, steady, and grounded in understanding. That presence allowed me to move without distraction, even while the other side fumed and plotted in circles I had already left behind. Within a month, the pattern of intrusion stopped. My parents ceased visiting the office. Rachel's posts slowed and then turned passive-aggressive, vague enough to be ignored. I changed my phone number and moved to a more secure residence. No one followed, no one called. The company continued to grow, contracts finalized, clients signed. Staff expanded. Each day moved the work forward without interruption. The noise from the family became background static rather than a looming presence. Occasionally, I would see a post from Rachel online, showing a piece of jewelry she was proud of. I recognized it immediately as a replica of a Victorian bracelet I had authenticated years ago. I didn't comment. I didn't correct her. The irony registered quietly, a small, private detail that needed no declaration. My parents didn't contact me after the legal boundaries were enforced. The occasional forwarded message from distant relatives stopped. The monthly transfers never restarted. I didn't attempt to restart them. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known was possible while maintaining distance. Work was demanding, precise, and absorbing. Evenings were calm. Weekends were mine. I spent time reviewing collections, checking auctions, and occasionally seeing the same tiny details in jewelry that no one else noticed. In the quiet, I realized that control wasn't something I'd seized. It was something I'd protected for myself all along. Boundaries weren't dramatic statements, they were a steady practice. And in that, I found the clarity and stability that had been absent in my family for decades. No calls, no demands, no questions. Only space to live quietly, deliberately, and without interference.